Good afternoon again, everyone. Hope everyone enjoyed a healthy lunch and had an opportunity to get a few steps in. We are back now with the next session at 1:15. This afternoon, we are thrilled to welcome two key organizations for our keynote on reducing stigma, the story of how a city came together. First off, we'll hear from Indiana Recovery Council from Brandon George and Matt Haskett. Brandon and Matt are both from the Indiana Recovery Council overview of the Stigma campaign. Brandon George is the Vice President of Mental Health America of Indiana and also the Director of the Indiana Addiction Issues Coalition. Brandon has been supportive of recovery and advocacy and alternate programs for Mental Health America throughout recovery and public policy and education. As a person in long-time recovery, Brandon dedicates his time personally and professionally to fighting addiction and promoting recovery. He has presented throughout the nation on a wide range of topics, including peer support, recovery-oriented systems of care, and substance use disorder treatment in the criminal justice system. Brandon has been used as a consultant for SAMHSA's Opiate Response Network, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and is a contributor to Harvard's Law Blog. He served as a trusted advisor to the National Judicial Opioid Task Force and recently spoke at the White House for the Office of National Drug Control Policy regarding addiction, workforce issues, and recovery messaging. Matthew Haskett is with us today as well to discuss the opportunities within reducing stigma. Matt Haskett is a recovery consultant and recovery coach with several organizations in the state. Matt currently works with Proactive Resources and participants in the Hamilton County OWI and Drug Court, as well as Experience, Strength, Hope, LLC, where he works with participants on parole through the Indiana Department of Corrections. As a person in long-term recovery, Matt spends much of his time advocating for and promoting recovery. Matt has participated in several efforts throughout the state, currently sitting on IUPUI's HCV Echo Hub panel and IU's OUD Echo Hub panel. Matt has presented to schools throughout the area on behalf of Overdose Lifeline and the This Is Not About Drugs program, and has also been a guest lecturer with IUPUI. We welcome Brandon and Matt at our first session of our keynote today to discuss with us how to review the Indiana Recovery Council's campaign on reducing stigma within the community. I'm going to hand this over to you, Brandon, and we'll see then your presentation go live. Give us one moment to publish that. And here we are.
All right, welcome everybody.
See your screen now.
Thank you for that introduction. It's greatly appreciated. And I'm really grateful to be with everybody today. It's exciting for me to get to present with Fishers, actually. I always joke that, we do work all over the state, except for in my backyard. Fishers, where I'm from. So I'm grateful to be on here with the mayor and team from Fishers, talking a little bit about what the Indiana Recovery Council does, and then Fishers' efforts as well. So just a little bit of background. We are presenting today on behalf of the Indiana Recovery Council. And what the Indiana Recovery Council is a group of people in recovery from both mental health and substance use disorder. For those of you, obviously this conference today is put on by the Division of Mental Health and Addiction. They also have an advisory board, which this is a sub-advisory group from, and they help provide recommendations to the state on a variety of things, from housing to peer support, to medication, etc. And this council made a decision, I guess about 18 months ago, that they really wanted to do something on stigma, and that while there had been a fair amount of campaigns around stigma, it was important to do one from the voice and perspective of those in recovery. And so we approached the state and said, we think it's really important that we're able to put together something that's directly from those in recovery from mental health and substance use disorder. And they agreed. Something that's a little unique here is that it's the first Stigma campaign that we're really aware of that incorporates both the mental health aspect and the addiction aspect. And so the Do You Speak Stigma? Stigma Never Helps campaign was born. And I want to briefly just go over the overview of it. There's media tools that we created that I want to share with you, and then get into the most important aspect of it, which is Matt sharing about his story of recovery and how stigma has affected him throughout his journey of recovery. It's been a lot of data, and we kind of know now that we can educate people over the head with information, but nothing really moves somebody from a position to another like personal connection. And so being able to identify with people who have who have experienced mental health or mental illness or substance use disorder is a much better chance of changing their view than simply putting out some educational tools. So a couple things that we did: providing marketing resources to across the state to different mental health providers. I think we were in contact with 90 plus other mental health and SUD providers around the state. And then compelling the public to engage with stigmaneverhelps.com. We went to an enormous amount of conferences throughout the state, both presenting out them and also setting up booths, talking about the use of non-stigmatizing language, and then also reduction of stigma through storytelling, which is our primary vehicle. Couple things that the toolkit includes. I'm not going to read each one, but we've got some teaser videos, the testimonials we mentioned, t-shirts, because who doesn't like good swag when they go to an event? Unfortunately, we're not in person, so I can't throw t-shirts at everybody today, but I would love to do so. Social media posts, digital ad assets. And so what we did originally was a big social media push, and we had a couple of things specifically around language and how people speak about people with mental health issues and SUD issues. And I want to play a couple of these. They're only 30 seconds long, so it should not take too long.
For 4 months, I was an all right guy.
Here we go.
Do you speak stigma? When a person with a disease like mental illness or substance use disorder hear the negative labels that others call them, they don't go away. Words matter, and what we say and do can stop people in need from seeking help. Now's your chance to change lives for the better. Visit stigmaneverhelps.com to find out how.
We do believe that that is the case. You know, how we speak about one another, the language we use has a negative impact. And there's been a lot of studies to confirm this at this point. I really used to think that this was semantics for a long time, that, oh, it's just words, who cares? And if somebody wants to call somebody an addict or something along those lines, then what's the big deal? Until I saw some of the data and started seeing how much more punitive people were when language was used like addict or substance abuser versus terms like person with substance use disorder or person with use disorder. And so getting the message out about using proper language was really, really important. And then the storytelling. So I want to show two of these. They're about a minute and a half each, and we will go from there.
It's not the full story. The full story is that I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm a professional. These are the full parts of my life. Stigma can stem from this idea that this little piece of information tells you so much more about a person than it really does. This part of having bipolar disorder is this little bitty part that actually doesn't tell you very much about me. I was actually at a recovery center and I was speaking with a recovery coach, and she says, "Oh, you don't want to have children. Oh, you should have children." So I said, "Well, wow, And she said, "You wouldn't want to put children through that, would you?" As if it was so shameful to have to be in a hospital for mental health issues that it's best not to have children because it's just too much for them to go through. What I came to realize was that at some point in my life, I will have to go to the hospital, whether it's for a broken leg, for cancer, for a heart condition, or because my mental health isn't where I'd like it to be. And no matter why I'm in the hospital, my children will be upset about it, but they'll be glad that I'm in the place where I need to be in order to get well, in order to get back to them. I listened to her at the time, but I ultimately decided that I was going to make my own decision. What do you want your life to be like? You have more power in this. Even with a mental health issue, you have more power than you realize. You can really get help. You can really learn how to cope, and you can really recover. And I'm very proud that I've been able to recover to the point where I can work full time. I can make a difference in my job. And I did have a child. I had a daughter, and she is too, and she's very happy about it. That stigma can help prevent us living fully because stigma never helps.
All right, and it's true, stigma does never help. And we know that only about 1 in 10 people who need treatment for SUD are able to get so. I was going to share one more video, but it appears there's a little bit of lag in the videos versus the audio, so I don't want to put everybody through that. What I can say is visit the website, stigmaneverhelps.com, and you can see videos from Spencer, who's here as well, and Da Vinci, who is on here, and they can talk about how stigma affected them in their recovery journey and how that impacted their ability to get care, how it impacted their ability to employment, how it impacted their ability across their recovery spectrum. A couple other things I want to touch on quickly before sending it over to Matt. We've got a digital assets in there as well. Talk about ways to effectively wrestle down stigma. Being conscious about language, something that we mentioned, listening, not judging, and treating people with mental health issues and substance use disorder with dignity and respect and kindness. You know, a little bit less love and a little bit less judgment. We've all got something, and you know, finding some kindness there goes a long way. And if kindness isn't your thing, and maybe finances are, you know, getting people into treatment and getting them help is financially beneficial too. The cost on employers, you guys can read through this, but hundreds of billions of dollars in economic burden, and so there's a lot of reasons to get on board with trying to get people help for those who need it the most. And roughly 1 in 5 Americans are dealing with some type of mental health issue. So, I mean, look around your office. Just look at the people that are in any given space. 1 out of 5, that's a bunch. That's a lot. In every office, it's a lot. In every organization, in every city. So that's what we're trying to help with. And so I also have the distinguished pleasure of introducing Matt. Matt has done a variety of work with Indian Addictions Issues Coalition, which is the organization I run on a day-to-day basis. Matt also has done a lot of speaking for the Indiana Recovery Council. His story has stigma barriers throughout the whole thing, and I can't wait to hear it. So thank you all for joining the session today. Matt, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, so I'm excited to be here today. And normally, when I've been asked in the past to do this, it's usually in person, like Brandon said. I toss out the T-shirts, and I usually like being there live in person. I'm getting a little too used to these virtual meetings as of late, but regardless of that, I'm excited to be on here today. And I'll probably take 10 minutes just kind of share how stigma affected, you know, my life before I got into recovery, clean and sober, and even still today and throughout that process. So, you know, I'm going to keep the backstory kind of short, but I'm from Indy. I'm 33 and I have a college degree in business from IU Bloomington. And, from the outside looking in, family life was great. My parents did everything for me. I got into all this colleges I applied to and ultimately chose IU. And, somebody looked at it from the outside in. There was no, one single thing you could point at of what led me down the road to my addiction. I think there was a combination of things that kind of led up to that point. But once that line was crossed after I graduated and I started to know I had a problem going on and something that I needed to address. The first thing was I myself was very uneducated about addiction and everything about it. I think just because of what I had seen growing up and hearing in the community and seeing on media and things like that, I felt bad about myself and I thought I should be able to figure this thing out. And I tried that for years, trying to figure it out by myself. And it did not go well. If anything, it constantly just got worse. And the stigma that just went along with that prevented me from actually accepting what it was I was dealing with and reaching out to get help and support that I needed. Friends and family and, friends of my parents, people that I didn't even really know when, they just heard little bits and pieces about my struggle and what I was dealing with. I think, subconsciously that they have these thoughts that I'm some bad person or I don't care, or something along those lines. And that's so far from the truth. If you talk to some of my good friends today that have known me a very long time, they would vouch for that as well. But at the same time, they were very uneducated on it also. And, the one big thing I want to point out that I noticed after the fact of all this, once I got into recovery and started doing this stuff, is how the stigma can trickle down. And it was something that my parents had to deal with as well. And what I mean by that is my parents kind of extended the lies that I had going or were embarrassed to even talk about it to their coworkers or friends. Just an example, if they shared some of the stuff I was doing and what I was struggling with to a coworker or friend, that person might automatically assume that, did my parents raise me right, or did they not do enough, or was there something they did that contributed to that? And, in my opinion, I had everything I needed. I had everything I wanted. My parents were absolutely great, and they still are to this day, and they're extremely supportive. But that was one thing I saw that my parents had to deal with and struggled with quite a bit. And then even when I got into recovery, it was still very hard for me to kind of be open about what was going on and share my story, because I felt like people would still have kind of look down on me because of what it was that I was struggling with. Whereas if it was something else like diabetes or something like that, but just because of my personal story of being, a person in long-term recovery from heroin addiction, I think people automatically kind of assume the worst or have some preconceived notion of who I am or what I am in their head. And, that stigmatizing language can be it can have such a negative impact on it to where it prevents people from reaching out or opening up and trying to seek help. And I still see it today where people are in recovery and they have a slip up, and they want to come back to whatever kind of, recovery community they're involved in. And that same stigma can prevent them from coming back. And I absolutely hate seeing it today, especially people that I've gotten to know and gotten close to. And ultimately, because of that, again, I wasn't very educated on addiction. I didn't even know the realm of what the recovery community and world was. I had no idea that it was even there besides 12-step meetings. And once I really got into being a part of that, that is what ultimately made me decide to switch kind of what I was doing for my career. I'd always done business and sales, but I wanted to find a way to help others, realize that there is a huge community there and people that support them, and not everybody, looks down on somebody struggling with that. And for me, the way I had to look at it was, if I'm not going to be open about my struggles and my issue, and kind of be real about it, and stand up for others that are going through the same thing, who maybe aren't able to speak up for themselves, or maybe are still have a lot of shame and guilt with that and struggle with being open about it. I wanted to be somebody who could do that, and I had this mentality that if I'm not going to do that, then who will? And that's kind of what got me into what I'm doing today. And it's a tough thing to see. And again, events like this are how I think change happens, and educating people on that. And like Brandon mentioned, that website, stigmathatneverhelps.com, has some really good resources, especially just in terms of verbiage and words used associated with somebody struggling with substance use disorder, or alcohol use disorder, things like that. So the biggest point I would stress is educate yourself on it. Even today, I'm coming up on 5 years sober in recovery, and my parents, for me, it's the coolest thing to see when my parents don't know something about it. And it kind of goes to that saying, if you don't know, you don't know. And one of the coolest things for me is when my parents start to ask me questions, whether that's about 12-step meetings I go to, the recovery communities and events that I take part in, or just basic questions they have, and trying to understand, if they say something to somebody, would that maybe bother them or be hurtful to them? And again, I don't know exactly if it might or might not. I just speak from my experience and try and put myself in those people's shoes. But for me, the fact that my parents and even my brothers and friends reach out to me and ask me these questions and talk to me about the stuff, shows me that they want to be supportive, and they're trying to find the best way to do that. And I've even had my parents come with me to events. I think 2 years ago, Brandon, when we had the recovery rally ride downtown, my mom left work early and met me down there and attended the event with me. And she thought it was so cool to see all these people there dyeing the canal purple and supporting recovery. And just little things like that can go so far and have such a big impact. And I'm truly grateful that I have the family and friends that I have today that are supportive like that, and try to educate themselves and understand what it is that I deal with and some of the stigma that I still face today. And I'll end with this. The most recent issue I had just dealing with the stigma of it is in December, I got let go from a position I had, and I had been in that role for almost 3 years. And I have a theft charge on my record from a few years back, from before I got sober. And there was new ownership for my employer. And long story short, I was let go because they would not keep me on staff because of that criminal theft charge. Even though I've been in the role for several years, and even right now, I've been kind of branching out for new options and avenues for employment, and it's still kind of being a roadblock for me. And again, I don't try to hide it. That's part of my story. That's part of what got me here. And at the end of the day, though, that little thing on a piece of paper does not represent who I am and the person I am today. So whether somebody is still in active addiction or in recovery, stigma can still be a big part of their story. And I enjoy doing opportunities like this and being able to advocate for those that experience that and who are trying to advocate for that today. So I'm really excited to be here today and see the rest of the presentation this afternoon. So thank you, Brandon. And that's all I have. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. First off, congratulations on 5 years of sobriety. We celebrate that with you. And thank you for taking your experience and sharing that and leading others into the pathway of recovery. So we greatly appreciate your leadership and all you've done within the state.
Thank you.
Matt has reminded us of something very important, that addiction is a disease, and that stigma prevents those from seeking recovery and treatment. And so what we must always be mindful of how our language and our stigma, as stigma is being perpetuated, how that impacts those that are seeking recovery. Brandon shared some excellent resources through the Indiana Recovery Council website. Please do take a look at those additional testimonials from persons in recovery that have self-disclosed their journeys in efforts to hope to share and reduce stigma so that many others can be afforded the opportunity to start their recovery journeys as well. Up next, I would like to introduce Kara Kavinsky. Kara is the co-chair for Speakers and Dignitaries Committee, and she has the pleasure of introducing Mayor Scott Sadness of the City of Fishers for his remarks on reducing stigma. Kara?
Yes, hi. I'm also introducing the rest of the panel. So I'd like to start with Ashley Elrod, Public Relations Director with the City of Fishers. Ashley leads the City of Fishers Community Engagement, Communications, and Media Relations as the Public Relations Director. With over a decade of communications experience in the nonprofit and public sectors, Ashley focuses on policy and communications for the mayor's initiatives, including the Fishers Mental Health Initiative. She holds a bachelor's degree from Indiana University and currently serves on the board for Youth Mentoring Initiative and lives in Fishers with her 2 children. Our fire chief for the City of Fishers, Steve Arusa, is head of the Department of Fire and Emergency Services and has been in that position since 2011. He has served over 35 years in law enforcement and fire service positions. He was a Deputy Fire Chief of Operations, US&R Planning Section Chief, and Deputy Operations Section Chief for the Super Bowl. I can't remember which one this is, and I don't read Roman numerals. It's in his bio. The one that was in Indianapolis. Incident Commander for the Henryville Tornado, Technical Review Consultant for NIOSH, Line of Duty Death Investigations, and Program Manager for the Indiana District 5 Type 3 Incident Management Team. He is past Director of the International Association of Dive Rescue Specialists Response Team and has served on public safety and military dive operations worldwide. He is the past president of the Hamilton County Fire Chiefs Association and serves on the Indiana Fire Chiefs Board as the Indiana Department for Homeland Security Liaison and first vice president. He serves on the following nonprofit boards: City of Fishers Youth Mentoring Initiative, Hamilton County Humane Society, Leslie Ann Hulse Foundation, which is for human trafficking, and the International Association of Dive Rescue Specialists, AIDRS, Board of Directors. He grew up in Chicago, receiving his bachelor's degree from Western Illinois University. He graduated with an HR management degree. He's a published author and frequently invited speaker on public safety leadership and development techniques. He has provided analysis on public safety response for USA Today, Fire Chief Magazine, Fire Engineering Magazine, and has also appeared on BBC, MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN to provide expert analysis on disaster response. The City of Fishers is lucky to have him. Brooke Lawson is the Mental Health and School Counseling Coordinator for Hamilton Southeastern Schools. She oversees and helps coordinate mental health services and school counseling for the district. She works closely with more than 40 school counselors, providing supervision related to mental health and student support. Brooke works with students and staff to create stigma-free environments in their school and community regarding mental health. She leads the district's social and emotional learning work and is a resource to support teachers and staff on social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, and suicide prevention. She is also active in making connections between the school district and the community to create systems of support for students and families and remove barriers when they exist. Brooke also oversees the district's mental health crisis response team. Prior to joining HSC Schools, she worked with Community Mental Health Center for 8 years in their school-based program. She's a Purdue grad with a bachelor's degree in adult, youth, and family services and obtained her master's degree in social work from Indiana University. She currently serves on the board for the Peyton Rykoff Foundation for Youth Hope, the SHIFT Initiative, and Fishers Youth Assistance. She lives in Fishers. Kelly Meyer is the president of Kelly Meyer Training Solutions and will be the moderator for the panel after our keynote by the mayor. Kelly has worked with Kelly Meyer Training Solutions since 2011, and prior to that, she worked 9 years for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. She has developed trainings on culture, communication, understanding mental illness, and key topics for frontline staff working on emergency response teams, hospitals, nursing homes, home health care, corrections, jail staff, law enforcement, community corrections, parole, probation, work release, the courts, community health workers, and others. She's worked extensively to establish crisis intervention teams and emergency response teams to prepare them with de-escalation techniques, cultural awareness, and an understanding of mental illness and related topics. In 2010, she co-developed CIT for corrections for the National Institute of Corrections, and in 2019, in partnership with the Center for Naval Analysis, Kelly revamped the 40-hour curriculum. Kelly has served as an advisor to the International Association of Chiefs of Police in Alexandria, Virginia, to help establish policy enhancing officer safety as related to mental illness. She has also developed programming directly for consumers of mental health services to better understand their illness, as well as to work in peer support for others with mental illnesses. She's currently working with TechServe Corporation to deploy statewide cultural competency trainings for the Division of Mental Health in Indiana, as well as training frontline response teams to the opioid crisis across the state. She holds a bachelor's in arts in French and theater from Indiana State University and a master of arts in executive development for public service from Ball State. And lastly, and most importantly, we have our keynote, Mayor Scott Fadness with the City of Fishers. Scott took office as the first mayor of the City of Fishers on January 1st, 2015, after holding various positions in the city since 2008. With his vision to develop Fishers as a smart, vibrant, and entrepreneurial city, Fadness has spurred new development, grown Fishers' employment base, and focused on quality of place initiatives to make Fishers the best city to live, work, and play in the Indianapolis metro, which has been recognized nationally. In 2015, Mayor Fadness launched the Fishers Mental Health Initiative after uncovering the mental health crisis in Fishers following a discussion with a Fishers police officer during a ride-along. Since then, the initiative has spurred changes in public policy procedures and public safety procedures for the Fishers Police and Fire Departments to identify training opportunities, change protocols for behavioral health runs, and launch the Behavioral Health Paramedic Program. The City of Fishers launched the Stigma-Free Fishers outreach campaign to reduce mental illness stigma, and in partnership with Hamilton Southeastern School District, supported the implementation and implemented a comprehensive mental health protocol to address youth mental illness. He holds a master's degree in public affairs from Indiana University and lives in Fishers with his wife and his sons. And they will be adding another boy to the mix by next week, from what I understand. Congratulations, and thank you, all of you, for participating in this very important panel and discussion. Mayor Fadness, we turn it over to you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and know that this has been quite a journey for the panel members with myself, Ashley, Brooke, Chief Arusa. We've been together working on this for the better part of 5 years, maybe even close to 6 now. Understanding when we talk about stigma and we talk about the vocabulary that is used in a community, I find that when I started this conversation in Fishers, it wasn't so much about the current vocabulary being used around mental health. It was the absence of the conversation around mental health that was truly a problem for our community. It was a lack of awareness on the aggregate, but for the individuals, it was there, very present, and nobody was talking about it. We often talk about it in the terms of people living in quiet despair. And so today, I'm not going to regurgitate a story that we've shared many, many times with a lot of probably the stakeholders on the call today. In fact, I'd rather just have an open, freewheeling conversation with my counterparts here, Ashley, Brooke, and Chief Arusa. And I think what's reflective here, if we're going to truly tackle stigma at a community-wide comprehensive level, you have to break it into different pillars of a community to really be able to affect change. And the 3 individuals, my teammates on this, reflect different aspects of the community. And I want each one of them to talk about, in particular today, since we're talking about stigma, what we had to do to really aggressively pursue this idea of a community that's marshaling its collective resources towards the issues of mental illness in our city. And I want to preface this by telling you we're still very much at work. This weekend on Saturday, we had a 43-year-old who hung himself and died by suicide. So we are not declaring victory by any means here in the city of Fishers. Each and every month, we're reminded of the work that lays before us, not only in the most extreme cases of people dying by suicide, but also those individuals afflicted with any number of different challenges around mental illness. But we'll start, frankly, I want to turn to Chief Arusa. I want you to talk about, Chief, what we had to change internally around the cultures in public safety, the stigma associated with mental health. And I mean that not only for the people we were serving, but our own employees, and what we had to do to really tackle the stigma around mental health in the pillars of public safety, which are so vital for a community. Chief?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And internally, public safety providers they don't have an affinity for mental health for various reasons. We're looked at as the rescuers, not the rescuees. But all of us listening probably know that we're all in various stages of being broken and healing. So to get people that prepare themselves 24/7 to respond to rescue other people, no matter what their challenge is, to actually be objective about their own thoughts and behavior and realize that they're not less than their fellow firefighters if they have challenges, because we all have challenges, and that by sharing their experience, they can actually be more than and help others and empower others by sharing their challenges. So that was on one level, the stigma internally amongst our fire and emergency services personnel. Then there's also the organizational stigma that we carry around, because the fire service is steeped in tradition. And that tradition is very much rooted around practices that we've done over and over and take great pride in. And that does not make change in institutional value in the fire service. We have an affectionate saying, the mayor and I, that the fire service is 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. And while we may chuckle, it's actually true. Here's a great example. Last year, we had 18 working structure fires and 410 mental health runs and 9 death by suicides. I would challenge other fire and emergency services providers to adjust their resources to meet the need for mental health in their community while meeting the need for working fires. That's a paradigm shift I think that we've got to make in the future. Additionally, besides the tradition, there's the culture that I mentioned earlier that, if we have issues, we're weak. We do all the saving, we don't need saving. So that tradition and culture stigma was challenging to overcome, because mental health isn't sexy on any level in public safety, much less in the public. So that's where our biggest challenge was. And I'm proud to say that under the mayor's leadership and our people have done a great job, but we continue to have to work on it daily. It's something we chase, we don't ever catch.
Maybe you could touch briefly on the amount of education and training we provided, not only firefighters and your EDOs, but actually our police department as well. It's one thing to say, okay, we need you to be more open-minded and to bring down the stigma and address people who are suffering with mental illness differently. It's quite another to institutionalize the training that they need to ensure that they can do that effectively. So can you talk about some of the training that we now provide our folks that perhaps a decade ago just wasn't something that we were focusing on?
Yes, and the challenge was, how do we prepare a 24-year-old police officer, firefighter, paramedic to deal with mental health challenges in their community, not only when people are during crisis, but before that crisis occurs. And we started with CIT training, the 40-hour training. And then as we learned from Brooke Lawson and other subject matter experts on the mayor's team, we realized that was just scratching the surface. We've come from requiring CIT training and a version of CIT, which we call CIT Light, for every person in our public safety departments, to now Our EMS duty officers, which respond on every behavioral health incident and also follow up within 72 hours, have over 120 hours of training of mental health de-escalation training and become a patient navigator for those individuals to try to influence their care and influence their outcomes.
Chief, I can't compliment you enough. I do believe it's very difficult to change the culture of public safety, and you certainly have led the way and have the battle scars to prove it. Brooke, we often talk about the next generation as the generation that's going to get this conversation about mental health right. And not only from us putting the infrastructure in place to provide the services to them when they need it at those early formative years, but also to change the conversation and the narrative around mental health. Can you talk a little bit about not only making sure that we have the services they need when they're in those formative years, but then also just in general how we change the culture in the school system so that when they do become adults, they're already grounded in this different idea or ideal of how we should treat one another regardless of any kind of mental illness?
Sure. So in Hamilton Southeastern Schools, I started in 2016, and really my first job was to oversee the mental health services within the district. And that's when we started a partnership with Community Health Network. But there have been a lot of other kind of initiatives that our district has taken on. One being this past school year was our first year that we started explicitly teaching social emotional skills to students in our district. And so just like we're teaching reading and math and writing, we're also teaching students how to manage their emotions, how to solve problems, how to get help if they need it, how to notice a friend who might need help. And one of the cool things I think that our students actually started on their own was a student mental health club. So shortly after I started in the district, a student reached out to me and asked if I would sponsor his mental health club. And I said, sure, but I wasn't quite sure what kind of mental health club high school students would want to be a part of. And so we got to talking some more, and he really had a vision to reduce the stigma within his school community and really be a voice for students in his schools that were struggling. And through that, they started the first student mental health club in the state, which has grown statewide. We now partner with a national club called Bring Change to Mind, and the students have really taken it upon themselves to educate their teachers, to educate their peers, and they're really often the ones who are identifying students who are struggling and connecting them with the adults who can then get them help.
I think as we talk about the fact that we're trying to change the next generation, one of the daunting tasks that we gave to Ashley Elrod, our communications director, was to change the culture community-wide so that the 40-year-old male, who was really what we saw statistically facing the highest level of challenge around mental illness, or at least from suicide rates, were telling us that they were steeply on the incline. How we were going to try to bring down the temperature, so to speak, to allow people to start to have the conversation as a community. And I think out of that call to arms, Ashley and her team came up with some really creative ways to do something as simple as start a conversation amongst a family. And I want to turn it over to Ashley to talk about the various methods she used and strategies she continues to deploy to try to get our adults talking in our community. Ashley?
Sure. For our community, it was really important that we have the systems in place before we really were very public about what we were doing. So we wanted to make sure that if we were successful in inspiring somebody to get the help that they needed, that they would have the systems in place to help them actually accomplish that. And so the communications and outreach portion of this effort really didn't occur until a few years into our journey, and since then has been continues to be informative every time we launch a new campaign. And to Mayor's point, our goal really has been around making sure that we're meeting people where they're at. We know that there's a small group of residents who have been great supporters of our mental health initiative, and we work alongside them. But our goal was really to go beyond that group and really reach people who may not intentionally seek mental health help or educate themselves around the stigma associated with mental illness. And so what we did was we have a very robust parks department that creates wide-reaching events throughout the year. And so we really tried to leverage those events to reach those who we wouldn't have previously reached. So whether it's creating a stigma-free Fishers Pledge that we had at our farmers market, and just start those casual conversations as people are walking through. A few years ago, and I think one of our most successful efforts at just trying to get families to start talking about mental illness and all things that impact mental illness was the public art installation of several, about a dozen very large scale, like 5 feet by 6 foot brains sculptures that represented different aspects of mental health. And those were sprinkled throughout our community. They had talking conversation starters connected to them. And what it created were these really natural conversations within families that allowed that stigma to not even be top of mind, but it was more of a natural part of their everyday conversation. And at the end of the day, that's really our goal, is that if we can get members of our community to have these conversations about well-being and support around their dinner table, we think that that's a success in our eyes.
So I think hopefully, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we have a panel discussion here where we've got some questions to answer. So I would just close with, obviously, the reason I do these presentations as a collective team is it has required a team, and each one of these individuals brings a unique insight and subject matter expertise to the table. And that really has been, if someone were to ask me what the recipe for success has been so far to date in the city, it's that we've had a diverse group of stakeholders together, headed in the same direction for an extended period of time, pretty disciplined about trying to get things done. I will close with one thought, and that is, upon reflection, I am certainly glad that we put the foundation in place for the challenges around mental illness in our community as we face unprecedented times. The amount of turmoil and angst and anxiety that exists in society today is obviously something that we all take very seriously, whether we're people concerned about a pandemic, whether you're someone who's lost their job, whether you're someone who is personally affected by the racial tensions that exist in our community today, or the rate of technological change. Any one of those, let alone all of them converging at the same time, can add undue stress and burden on our residents. And so the work around stigma, the work around mental health has never been more important to ensure the resiliency of our population moving forward. And I can tell you here in Fishers, we'll remain committed to that end, and the work is ongoing and will continue to do so moving forward. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we're happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, panel. Can you hear me fine? This is Kelly Meyer with Kelly Meyer Training Solutions.
Sure.
Yes.
Great. Oh, thank you. I want to first and foremost thank all of you for sharing your great work with us today. It is so inspiring, and we can certainly learn a lot from this great work that you're doing. I have a few questions here before me, a few questions that have come in via chat. I encourage folks to send those questions, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. But it is such a difficult conversation to start. And you say you've started that conversation, but what are the tactics, and do you have some good phrases if we happen to see someone in distress, or key phrases that you're inspiring people to use that invite acceptance? And if you have any tips that you've found that garner trust in words or actions that we should avoid, we'd appreciate hearing some of those lessons learned.
Brooke, I think that'd be a great opportunity for you to talk a little bit about what social emotional learning and just tolerance in the schools. Can you talk a little bit about what you're telling those kids, because I think it applies to adults as well.
Sure. I'll start with as a school district, shortly after we started the mental health initiative in Fishers, we started training all of our teachers in QPR, which is question, persuade, refer, an evidence-based suicide prevention curriculum that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. And we did that initially just with our 5th through 12th grade teachers, knowing, making the assumption that they were mostly going to be the ones who were dealing with students who might be considering suicide. But we quickly found out through lots of data collection that all of our teachers really needed that training, and actually our students could really benefit from it as well. And one thing we noticed quickly with the student club was that because the students were elevated as somebody who cared about mental health, other students felt safe coming to them. And so we wanted to be very careful that they weren't put in positions where they felt like they needed to be another student's therapist, but that we were arming them with the tools to connect that student to another adult who could get them the help that they needed. And so we've really grown that training among all of our teachers. We also noticed that our younger students were also expressing suicidal ideation. So we started training all teachers within the district when this initiative started. And I think that it's difficult for anyone to be prepared for a conversation like that. But I think if you can approach it in a way where you're talking about how much you care about that person and noticing the changes in their behavior, and also educating yourself on what someone who might be struggling with a mental health issue might look like. I think that those are all steps that people can take to connect someone to the help that they might need.
Thank you so much, Brooke. And if we, and again, this work is so very important, because if we compare suicide to the numbers of any other disease, we're going to top epidemic proportions. And the saddest part about that is those numbers are inaccurate, because the only way, they're far greater, because the only way that you are a suicide statistic is if the medical examiner or coroner, or whoever the physician is who signs off on the death certificate, rules a suicide. So you could be death by asphyxiation, death by gunshot wound, death by car crash. Those could all be suicides, but they are not part of the statistics. So this problem is so much greater than we could ever know, which leads me to, and I say that so sadly, but it leads me to, like, you've had some great success with some of your media campaigns and how you're getting this word out. And so I'd like to know, like, which medium has been the most effective, and how are you measuring your success? So I'm going to throw in one more question to make it a little more global here, but please share a noted success story with the group too. So with that, how are you measuring your success? Which medium's been the best for you, and what is a noted success story from the campaign that you've been doing?
Ashley, you want to tackle that?
Yeah. For us, of course, we're doing social media, we're, hosting events, etc. But in terms of reaching audiences that I don't think we would typically do, really just convincing reporters to cover stories around stigma and around mental illness. And many reporters are very hesitant to cover this topic because of the stigma, and traditionally has not been something that reporters want to recover or have even considered covering. But through our relationships with those media outlets, TV, newspaper, etc., we've been able to share how important it is to get these stories out there to help reduce that stigma. And so for me personally, I think that that's been the most impactful. It's also where some of our success stories come from. So one of my favorite success stories is of a young gentleman who saw the news that his hometown was working through how to approach mental illness in the community and how to reduce the stigma. And he himself was just a few months off of a a suicide attempt, his second or third, and he came into the office to share how much it meant to him that not only was his community trying to combat this problem, but how could he help others through our program. And since then, he has become a peer trainer and is working to help spread the word about mental health and to reduce the stigma. And those personal success stories is what personally drives me to know that we are helping individuals every day.
Thank you so much for that.
Kelly, if you don't, I would like to piggyback off of what Ashley had said as well. I think one thing for our school district that we've just made it okay for students to not be okay. And we've made it very clear that if you're struggling, there are adults in the building who are here to help you. And we actually, when we started talking about suicide prevention and mental health and mental illness, we saw an increase in the number of students expressing suicidal ideation, but we actually felt like that was a good thing because students knew who to go to and how to get help if they were struggling, and understanding that suicide isn't an option. And we've actually seen those numbers start to decrease now. And we feel like a lot of that is because we're intervening early and we're getting students the help that they need before they're considering suicide. And so we're actually tracking that data. We've seen a lot more students who are receiving mental health services at school, and the number of students expressing suicidal ideation now has trended down for the past 3 semesters.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. And even back to the beginning of the conversation that Ashley shared leads us to our next question. But when we're dealing with the press, sometimes it's the press that uses a sensationalizing headline that actually is stigmatizing when they're not meaning to. So if we are saying something like the homeless, we are saying, oh, those people. Or if we say the mentally ill, we say, oh, those people. And we haven't put the person first, going back to Brandon and Matt's very personal story there. And so there's ever a chance that we can educate the press to that appropriate language so they're telling the story better as well. We're getting those great messages out to our folks. We have a question here with that in those steps that we're taking with the inclusion and how we're trying to reduce the stigma, how are we addressing the needs, the treatment, the education to our Spanish-speaking communities and other ethnic cultures?
Well, from the city of Fisher's standpoint, we started doing some pretty heavy equity work late last summer. It really followed on. The school really took the lead in a lot of equity and inclusion work, probably starting as far back as 2 years ago, if I'm getting that right, Brooke, maybe even a little bit farther back. One of the things Fisher's realized is we're still very much in our adolescent stages as a community. And as we've grown, our demographics have changed significantly. What used to be a rural, pretty homogenous community demographically has started to change significantly from a racial makeup, from a sexual orientation, cultural background, you name it. We're becoming a very diverse community, and we want that to be an asset. And in order for that to be an asset, we've got to put the right infrastructure, the right culture in place to address all of our residents' needs. And there was a huge awareness gap, just a lack of understanding and education about what needs to be done. And so last year for the city, I required all of my leadership team as well as myself to go through interrupting racism to truly understand the social constructs and the historical context for matters of race. And it was very impactful on all of us. And we're continuing that work through a group of community leaders to lay out a plan going forward. But to say the least, mental health, mental wellness will be a key component of that race discussion going forward in the city of Fishers. And I know within the schools, equity work has been at the forefront, and I know schools are doing a number of things as well.
Thank you so much. And those are very, very important words and important work that is going on and that needs to be done. And we appreciate that very much. Our next question is directed to Steve. Chief, it says, I am aware of the police departments that have specific CIT trained officers, and it's great to hear from the fire department is also doing so. How do you link those individuals to mental health treatments? Are there specific mental health agencies, providers that you collaborate?
What we've done, we realized that, well, it's been an evolution of providing mental health services. So the old traditional way of mental health services, well, we really didn't have de-escalation techniques. We don't understand a lot about the disease. I was a paramedic for 20 years, and my paramedic manual back in the day had like a paragraph on mental health. And if you look at that same paramedic manual, now it has probably a page. So we had to be very intentional about how we were going to change things, and it had to be uncomfortable, frankly, for us to be intentional about it. So we realized that if we were just going on 911 calls and providing service to people who were in crisis, that we weren't doing our job, that we had to change that. So what we did is we realized that we needed to follow up on these patients, establish a relationship with them, and if we could gain their trust, we could help them make good choices about their mental health and influence their outcomes. So about 18 months ago, we established an EMS duty officer program. Every behavioral health incident in Fishers is followed up within 72 hours by an EMS duty officer. EMS stands for Emergency Medical Services. Those officers, these patients are not a one and done. They contact these patients by phone, they do home visits, and they build that relationship that I spoke of earlier. And we've had some great successes and some great relationships, but we're just scratching the surface. The program's only 18 months old. And it's continuing to evolve. The educational requirements for the EMS duty officers, the amount of services, they are a navigator for different services. We're getting more and more services on board, so we can truly fill in the gaps on a behavioral health response instead of just going on a 911 call when a person's in crisis.
Thank you so much, Chief. This is a fantastic segue to our next question. But sometimes it is when we're working with other agencies and such, it's great to know each other's protocols, to understand how we can help, another agency do their job better, while at the same time they're helping us with the great work that we're doing. And it might come as no surprise that we have some comments here that our providers our mental health providers would like to know what further roles they can do to provide help to you in the great work that you're doing. What are some of the gaps that you're seeing where some of our audience members today are actually saying, how can we help? And so if they're, and you're like, oh, my list, you're pulling out your big scroll. You can't see me. There's only room for so many on the panel up there, pictures. So I'd rather look at your beautiful faces. But how do I drop that big scroll list of your to-do list? But what are some of those ways they can help?
Well, I'll start and Brooke jump in from a school perspective. It was really great during the COVID epidemic when we had everyone locked in their homes, basically, that a lot of our providers stepped forward and said, hey, I'm willing to demonstrate or provide hours available to help individuals who are feeling a great deal of anxiety or struggling with being isolated. That was extraordinary to see the mental health community come out and be a key part of our city. And really that, to me, is more than naming any specific item today. It's building a relationship with us as we're on this journey, because I can't tell you that service is needed today or tomorrow, but 2 months from now or 6 months from now, the community could change, the challenges could change, and having that relationship so we can be nimble and we can work collectively towards whatever the challenge that comes up. Who would have thought in 2020 we'd be dealing with race riots, a pandemic, and an economic collapse all in the same spring? Here we find ourselves. And so those relationships that we build early and are meaningful allow us to draw on each other's resources going forward. So to me, it's just making us aware of who you are. Let us know what your capabilities are. And then when those opportunities come, trust me, we're not afraid to ask for help when we need it.
Thank you. If you think of those lists, don't be afraid to reach out to your local providers because they are asking for those lists. We have another question here. Rates of suicide and suicide attempts are much higher among LGBTQ plus youth and their non-LGBTQ plus peers. What are your organizations doing to specifically address that disparity in your community?
Brooke, you want to touch on that?
Sure. So our schools have different affinity groups for students, and we have taken the initiative to do some training. We know that when students are struggling, they're often more likely to go to their peers, and so we have made some intentional focuses not only for our student mental health clubs but our student GSA clubs, just making sure that our students are equipped with how to help their peers and where to go when they need help. I know that this is an area that we could still improve on. We, just like with all of our equity work, we've done some intentional training too with teachers and staff in our buildings around supporting LGBTQ youth. We have created some transition plans for our students who are transgender to make sure that they feel safe and supported at school. So we've done quite a bit of work in this area, but we know we still have more work to do.
I think we're also very cognizant, whether you're talking about race, whether you're talking about sexual orientation, sexual identity, we're aware of the national narrative today, and we're intentional about trying to create a place here in our community where they feel welcome and connected. Probably overcompensating for the fact that if you turn the TV on, if you go on social media, there's an awful lot of messaging going on out there that would cause a higher degree of anxiety than by any means is necessary. And so I do think in our community, we have to work especially hard to help those individuals who may be feeling anxiety, not necessarily from their own personal experience in their community, but from the national narrative that is bombarding each and every one of us every day. Today is just a challenging time regarding these different groups, and we need to be very intentional about how we reach out to those folks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is huge. I like and I think we all like what you've been doing with the Parks Department and the various things that you, and the schools and everything you've said where you've tried to start the conversation. I know that all of us could use any, how to, any tip, any visual, any verbiage that we can to know how do we do it. We don't, I think as a society, we don't necessarily have that toolkit. And so putting those words in our mouths, putting those phrases, giving those to us, letting us see the visuals, kind of the error of our ways, is being, is so very helpful for all of us. Here. Do you have, I have a couple more questions here. There's so much that you're doing and so much to share, but you've worked a lot with youth and the schools. Have there been any of the older populations or specific populations that you've seen success, or even any awesome surprises that you didn't anticipate from what you're from the work that you've been doing, where folks have where you've seen and where you've had made a difference?
So I'll take that in two chapters, what we've done today and then what I'm excited about moving forward. The first chapter, I would tell you, really started downstream in the most emergent situation, which is what Chief Arusa touched on, which is we get a 911 call for an adult who's in mental distress, being able to deal with that individual well and to be able to help them and follow up on them has been a key component. Also, Ashley's work in trying to bring down stigma, and what's been really rewarding, frankly, is seeing all of these groups spin up that we really don't have. They're not a direct offshoot of what we're doing. They're just, the culture is such in our community now that people feel like, hey, I'm passionate about this as well. I'm going to go start a group. And so we've seen a lot of that kind of grassroots activity here in our city. That's really exciting to me. But what I'm really interested in this fall is we're going to do a community wellness survey. And it's not going to be, hey, let's email it out and see what we get. This is going to be done scientifically so that we get some really good data. And this is modeled a little bit after what we saw out of San Diego, where instead of asking kind of the typical questions about level of service in our community, are you happy with snow plowing? Do you feel safe in your community from a police perspective? Really more about where is your head at today? Are you feeling socially isolated? Are you stressed out? What are your family dynamics like? We want to understand the well-being of our community. And I really think that piece of information this fall will chart the course for the next chapter of our mental health initiative. And so Ashley's working on that document right now. And we hope to roll that out to our residents this fall to really get a better idea of what is the 74-year-old couple in Fishers, where's their head at today? Where's the 42-year-old divorcee? Where is that person's head at? You know, what are those dynamics? What are their challenges? And I can't think of a better year, frankly, on the backside of a lot of these challenges that we've seen this spring to really try to understand where our community's at. And then the real question is, what do you do with it once you know it? And that's where the work will really begin for us. But I'm excited to ask that question, and I'm even more excited to answer it.
Well, thank you so very much. We actually have a couple more questions that we will not be able to get to because people have been so very inspired by your terrific work. Brandon Mack, thank you so very much. Chief Steve Arusa, Brooke, Ashley, Mayor Fadness, all of you. This has been quite an uplifting, educational, and helpful session, and we just appreciate your good work tremendously. And I thank you so very much for being here. And again, thank you for adding to our conference. We appreciate you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.